We are going live presently.
Welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see all of you here. I'm Lori Grace, the Executive Director of the Institute for American Democracy and Election Integrity, which is a division of Sunrise Center. And I'm here again to talk with you about, with my good friends and co-workers, John Brakey and Bob Fitrakis, who's part of the Institute, and then Jim Soper, who has also come in to join us locally from California, about the issue of hacking our elections and about resistance, both within our own country, to creating transparency and integrity and a voting system we can trust. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we'll do, we're going to start first, more historically, with Bob here, who will talk about the Wisconsin recount and the Pennsylvania, and really all of them, okay? And how disappointing this was for those of us who care about election integrity and a democracy, and he will talk about the institutional resistance on both Republican and Democratic sides to being able to do a recount, okay? And then John Brakey over here, who also participated with the recounts, will talk about the possibility of being able to find a way to audit our votes with less cost, I think, and more ease. And that too has been being resisted. But strategies around that and ways that you can help. And then I'm going to talk about something that I haven't followed that extensively, but I got extensive downloads from my associate Brett Kimberlin from protectourelections.org about what have the Russians been doing with our elections, and what has the NSA been doing or not doing to create elections we can trust. And then Jim Soper here will talk about some bills here in California that could reduce our ability to have auditable elections. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Naomi here is our wonderful reader of questions from our online audience, and thank you all of us, and thank you all, and you should be getting some cards to write out questions as well, or I guess you can raise your hand, but actually you should probably have cards.
Speak into the mic when they're asking a question.
Will they step up forward here? I think it would be great if they
just... Because otherwise they're not heard.
There's a mic
on
here
the
we
live
can
stream.
pass around if
yeah.
it's long enough.
Or we can pass out index cards for them.
Or people can just speak up.
Yeah,
I mean, we can
there's
hear
a mic right there.
We can hear what's going on.
All right, whatever. Okay, so thank you all, and thank you for, we're starting our next round here at the Institute, and thank you, Bob, for starting us off. Yay.
Okay. Good to be back. I was here a lot last year. Thank you. Let me begin by just briefly telling you how the recount came about. Really a group of computer scientists at major universities, Doug Jones, for example, of course Alex Halderman, who is perhaps the most visible, in a variety of other computer scientists, were greatly concerned about what they saw as signs of election intervention. Now, my role, to be quite clear, I was just accused of being biased at the American Political Science Association because I was Jill Stein's attorney. But I've also worked in the past with Jesse Jackson, and I've had many Republican clients as well. So my bias/value is I really like transparent elections. And this is my value or bias system. I don't believe any nation that allows private, partisan, for-profit corporations to secretly program computers and make them non-verifiable. That nation is not a democracy. So that's my bias/value system. So with that in mind, I was called by Jill Stein the week of Thanksgiving, and she wanted to know, she'd been approached by John Boniface, an attorney who had done the 2004 recount for the Green Party in Ohio, and said a variety of computer scientists were really concerned about the activity, as well as people like myself were concerned over the exit polls. So the initial decision, which caused tremendous problems within the Green Party and tremendous attacks by Donald Trump and Fox News, originally the entire endeavor to recount was based on the State Department and Agency on International Development Standards. And this is a very important question we need to consider. And here it is. Overseas, the U.S. uses exit polls as red flags to determine voter fraud. And these are done by the same companies overseas, the same company in particular, Edison Research Group in the U.S. Now, in the U.S., we're told that the exact same polls by the exact same company used overseas to determine fraud can't determine fraud within the United States. Very bizarre. And this is the ultimate American exceptionalism, and Jim Heddle has suggested this, is that the universal laws of statistics apply every place on this planet except the United States. Even when they're done by the same company using the same methodology. They determine fraud overseas, that's where the fraud's committed. But over here, they can't determine fraud even when they're indicating fraud. Okay, so as long as we understand that that's what we're going up against. And in the regular American Political Science Association I dealt with yesterday, just the whole notion, these people believe in the official numbers. Why? Their careers are made on the official numbers. If you tell them maybe the official numbers don't match the gold standard, the exit polls, it throws them off. They want to know why you're saying this stuff. You know, what are we going to do? Go out in the field and actually watch elections? We analyze the official numbers after the fact. And some of you may know this, and I really blame it on John Brakey and others. If they actually looked into it directly, I sued in Ohio. John convinced me it was a winner, that 14 counties had turned off their audit logs and their ballot imaging, right? They bought state-of-the-art scanners. They were looking really sharp, and they turned them off. So I sued thinking I would win to have them turn their security back on. And the judge, in this case, a Republican-appointed judge in a room, accused me, among other things, of impugning the integrity of the Ohio voting system. And I, of course, had to say, look, that already happened. You remember J. Kenneth Blackwell, 2004? Our integrity has been impugned beyond repair by turning on the security features. It may actually help us that we're trying to have a fair election. I also sued over the exit polls. I sued Edison Research Group, as I actually announced here. Yeah, one night I announced here that I would go after them. And here's the nature of that suit. Just a lot of people have asked me about what I was looking for. I was trying to get them declared a state actor, right? And this is why. They coordinate with the Secretary of States in many states. I sued the Secretary of State in Ohio. They work together and they share data, and there's an assumption. No matter what our exit polls look like, no matter what our results look like, when push comes to shove, we will accept the most improbable results from the Secretary of State's office, and will adjust everything, no matter how crazy it looks, to adjust them in order to accept the official results. So election night, there's half of 1% difference between Trump and Hillary Clinton. Trump wins by 10%. massively outside the margin of error. If Ohio, and by the way, 12 other states were outside the United States, other nation states, our State Department would have denounced the election and demanded a probe. But here it's like, oh my God, it's off by 10 points. Let's just adjust it and pretend like this unbelievable amount of college students voted for Trump and this unbelievable amount of women came out and voted for him, and areas that haven't voted Republican in, since the last century, well, 2 centuries ago, the 1800s, suddenly they all voted Republican. And no one challenges this. Nobody says, look, maybe your exit polls are right. As people exit, they're saying how they voted. Maybe the instruments, the ones with no paper, the ones you can't recount, the ones that you talk about recalibrating, which is a word for they're not recording right and the votes might be flipping. They use the term recalibrate. We had to recalibrate the machine. Oh, you mean the vote was flipping and giving the vote to the wrong candidate and you had to reset your machines in the middle of an election? Because that's what you're really talking about in this case. So those things happened, but briefly, if we look at Wisconsin, I'll go through Wisconsin, Michigan, and of course Pennsylvania. We considered 2 other states, right? Here was our method. In what state did the exit polls indicate somebody won other than the person with the actual vote count? And in this case, the exit polls had to suggest that it was either a toss-up within a point or that the other person should have won in the exit polls, but the official vote count went to somebody else. And that was really only 5 states. There was one state where Hillary Clinton got an unexplained high vote outside the exit polls. That was New York. But even if she would have given all those votes back to Trump and doubled them, she still would have won New York. But in Wisconsin, it was fairly clear, as well as Rush Feingold running for Senate, that the exit polls said that they had won, and they'd won by 3-4 points in that state. And so you were getting a close victory by Trump when Hillary Clinton, it was suggested, should have had a 3 or 4 point victory. So the lessons of Wisconsin, and there's a few of them, and John Brakey uncovered one, right? The fact that you've got wireless and cellular connected voting machines. But one thing is they didn't follow the law. And when they did follow the law, the rulings of the law weren't very positive for election integrity. The state judge in Wisconsin ruled, of course, that it's up to the municipalities who are doing the counting to decide whether they actually want to look at the ballot in place. The most ethnically diverse area, the one we're most concerned with, they simply wouldn't count. That came from a judicial ruling. The other interesting thing, because Wisconsin's still being litigated, I don't know who in here knew this, but under Wisconsin law, you have to put the source code from the computer companies in escrow. Now, having talked to the various, I talked to Doug Jones about this, computer scientist, just recently. He said originally those laws came from, in case the company went belly up, the state would have the source code for the election. But it is the law. What we found out in the course of litigation, since it was the law since 2005, they have never ever put the source code in escrow, which would allow it to be examined to see if Russians or American firms with the keys to the kingdom have actually tampered with it. They've allowed the companies to hold it in escrow for the state. So the private for-profit companies that count secretly and have no accountability would hold their own source code. Okay, so the part of the conflict between the litigation people and myself, I was the advisor to the Stein re-election campaign. That was my legal duty to discharge there, is I wanted to declare the whole recount illegal and go public with this information. The other side, because their litigators have preferred to litigate and litigate and litigate, I was much more into making a very large scene and going public on how absurd it is that we can't look at the escrowed source code. So those are the lessons of Wisconsin, is that, and we counted more ballots in Wisconsin than elsewhere. Some lessons there, and this has happened in Ohio in 2004. It also happened in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Whenever you go in for a recount, in this case, the Republican Trump in 2016 and Bush in 2004 have lost noticeable amounts of votes prior to the recount. Recall that Bush won by 139,000 votes in 2004 in Ohio. Just calling for the recount, he ended up with 118,000 votes. They had accidentally given him 20,000 more votes than he had earned. And with the 3% recount in that state, the rate of pickup was high enough that it would have reversed the election had all 100% been recounted. But Trump lost votes in Wisconsin. He lost a quick 5,000 votes. A lot of the small towns had double counted. Same pattern we saw in places like Clyde, Ohio, that went heavily for Bush in 2004. They had double counted their votes. They had run them through twice. I figured that one out, and people say I'm not a statistical genius. When I saw there was 131% voter turnout, I immediately knew that something might be amiss. Okay, so, Mish, go ahead.
I'd like to, we've been talking about these states that were dominated by Republicans, but could we also talk more about Pennsylvania too?
Well, I was going
Which
to go
has
to
a
Michigan, but I can go to
Democratic-
Pennsylvania.
No, do both. But
Well,
just
there's
so
nothing
we-
really to say much about Pennsylvania, right? If there's no paper in the machine, 85% of the machines had no paper, right? They were DRE. If there's no paper in the machine, it's really hard to recount, particularly when the judge says you can't have access to the actual computers. Pennsylvania was to be a test of a couple different things. Number one, you had to have, from every precinct in the state, you had to have, the affidavits from 3 people to go forward from every single, precinct. It was virtually impossible to do that. So only small areas of Pennsylvania were we allowed to recount, but we couldn't have access to the machines. The computer scientists are saying, let us look at the machines. Let's do, forensic computer work. Let's open them up. We weren't allowed to do that. The courts ruled that in the recount, whatever the state law is, and each state has its own unique laws, and in this one, you couldn't look at the machines to see if anyone had tampered with it, and the state legislature, in their infinite wisdom, in order to save money, decided to have an election that can't be recounted, where 85% of the machines had no paper. Michigan, the last one, just briefly, this is where we learned some interesting things. Underserved areas have incredibly high rates. Poor areas, southeast area, Detroit, the machines are old. You have the problems of the scans can't be fed into the counters. They come back, and also bad training. They're blaming it on bad training. But in many of these areas, there was somebody had broken the security seal. Under Michigan ruling from somewhere around circa 1954, if the security seal is broken, you cannot recount the ballots. So it almost as if somebody wandered around Detroit breaking security seals, yeah.
500 ballots in the bag.
Yeah, in many cases, you just had numerous broken seals, hence they couldn't be counted. And the other thing in Michigan we really wanted to look at, which we never really got a chance to, was the undervote, which we thought may have been due to coding, because you could vote single straight ticket there for Republican or Democrat. You could push one button. But they wanted us to believe primarily in the southeast Detroit area, the Wayne County, greater Detroit area, that 76,000 people had come out to vote and failed to cast a vote for president. And they wouldn't look, we never got to count those, to actually look at the ballot and see if there was a mark there. So all three states, also in Michigan, the Trump forces came in very heavily. Initially, there was a federal ruling that we could recount. Then the Attorney General got in on the issue of standing and said, Jill Stein can't be counting these votes since she can't win the election. The Michigan Supreme Court went along with them, and then the federal judge reversed his decision and ended the recount there. So that's another question, one of standing. Obviously, the computer scientists and John Boniface went to the Clinton campaign first, and I believe Clinton had an obligation in elections that close with questions about the exit polls showing her winning to actually recount the election. Apparently she had another perspective. So I'm done.
So thank you. Just for those of you online or here, we're going to have questions after each person has talked. So if you have questions coming up right now, make a note of them, and then we'll be answering, and different people will answer different things. And we are taking a bit more time with each speaker, which seems to be appropriate. And the only other thing, just before we switch over to John Brakey, I just wanted to say, when the recount first of all, I want you to know the Bernie Sanders-Hillary primary was really distorted also between exit polls and the computerized vote totals, and that's where we really started getting going, those of us, this particular year. And that was what the lawsuit, which we instituted against Edison Media Research, was really seeking to get the raw data on that. And Bob is right that our exit polls in our country are not treated the same way as they are in others. I do want to say, just personally for myself, when I saw that there was really energy behind looking at what is a really honest election in our country, and Jill Stein was raising a lot of money, I actually celebrated. I thought our time has come as election integrity activists or people who want a true democracy. And I was profoundly disappointed that both Democrats and Republicans resisted in their own ways the counting. And what I've come to see really deeply is the problems with institutional resistance in our country. And yet there are opportunities for us to change, and we'll talk about that later. So with that, I'd like to head to John Brakey here, and
Thank you.
He's going to talk about a magnificent thing called ballot images.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Bob. And I had the pleasure to be in Wisconsin too. I took 2 teams up there. And it was pretty startling. Before I go into the images, just a couple of my footnotes on Wisconsin is that I took with me a really incredible lawyer out of Washington, D.C., named Chris Sauter. And Chris has been doing elections since, I guess, about 1984. And he was in Florida when that bad decision happened that he advised against. He was Al Franken's attorney that was Yeah, Minnesota. That was a $15 million recount, 800 lawyers. And you know, getting back to Wisconsin, when I was up there, you know, the minute I found out that counties had a choice, or municipalities, to hand count or machine count, I said, after watching Madison do a great job hand counting and seeing the procedure, we focused on the counties that did not hand count. They did a machine count. But I want you to know something, that how bad this thing really is that most of the work was in prepping for the hand count or the machine count. They had to take all the ballots, they had to sort them out and separate, they had to go ahead, if there was an extra 2 ballot, come up with a system to discard those ballots or whatever. And really, the hand counting was the simplest part. The machines that they counted with were terribly slow, okay? Hand counting, I mean, my God, if after they did all this work prepping, which they had to do, then all they had to do is, okay, let's make a pile of ballots for Trump, let's make a pile of ballots for Hillary, and let's make the other ones, and then count them. Instead, they ran up these machines that maybe did 10 to 12 ballots per minute, is all they did. And yeah, like Bob, I'm very suspicious of Milwaukee. That was organized chaos, okay? Waukesha, if you've ever been to Wisconsin and you've been in an election, you've been Waukesha'd. That's what they call it. You remember the election where the election director took the ballots home and said, oh my God, look what I found, or whatever process they had. It was just a heck of a situation. Other than that, I think that they have a pretty good system up there. And I like how Wisconsin, the people who did hand count, but it only turned out that half of them were hand counted. And it's like a really interesting choice. You know, you're innocent and you're guilty, and you got a choice. You can confess and show how good you are by hand counting, and you can just machine count if you're guilty and prove nothing. That's what it was. And in the very beginning, once I realized that, you know, I talked to Stein twice, I said, hey, we're getting ripped off. It's like going to an to an ATM machine and getting the same results twice. What makes you think it's going to be different? Secondly, where they did hand count, the error rates was atrocious. And I'll go a little bit into my presentation, so I'm going to go into mine. Audit AZ is a group that's been around a long time, 13 years. I consider myself to be an election integrity activist, or at least I was, because I realized that the solution really is transparency. And now I am an election transparency activist because of what we know now that we can do. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead on to the next slide here. That's our mission, same mission since the very beginning. And voter suppression, election fraud, gerrymandering are very serious issues. Our focus has been basically on taking the black box and turning it into a transparent box. And that's what these ballot images can do for us. The Kennedy, I'm from Maine, Massachusetts, the Kennedy family, and I found this statement, and I just think it's so incredibly true, that we are the boss, and we deserve what we get. But when he wrote that book and he did what he did, he said that before that our votes were computerized, privatized, and outsourced, because we have been outsourced. I have a document. It's going to be very hard for me to be able to explain. That's why I got a PowerPoint here. But this is online, and I have extra copies here. It's a 25-page report, 107 links. And I'm not going to be able to tell you the stories about how bad your election in California was in the primary, and that you were stacked, you were stripped, and at the very end, they started flipping because the last 35% of the vote was not audited. I can go into stories about Massachusetts, and I'll do that one real quick. I've done Massachusetts twice before the primary. When I did the primary in Massachusetts, and I do audits, audit, our group name is Audit, stands for Americans United for Democracy, Integrity, Transparency, and it actually came out of an audit. Massachusetts has 351 municipalities. I've done their elections twice, like I said. And I knew that on special elections, 68 to 72 of these municipalities hand counted their vote. And so I said, well, I can't wait to get into this data. So I dug in real hard, pulled up all 10351, and I found that Bernie Sanders lost the state of Massachusetts by 1.42%. He lost every college town, every municipality of a large size that was run by a group that runs elections for 5 states in New England, okay? And by the way, the 68 hand counts, which equaled 2% of the vote, he won by 17.9%, okay? I analyze elections all across the country. That's what I do. And I don't have, sometimes I don't have to be there. I just have to know the laws and get a hold of the data. And so there really are some severe things. And like I said, all of those stories you're going to find in this thing. And I urge you, if you're from California, read the stack, strip, and the flip. And then you're going to realize how lucky you are to have Ray Lutz in this state to do what he did in San Diego. Because he did discover that the front end was stacked. I got to tell you real quickly the story. Election night, first off, I went to a conference in California, in LA, and they said, John, would you go ahead and help analyze, because we know your work, Mimi, Kenny, and others. I said, yeah, I'll do that. And so election night, I'm doing my snapshots, I'm pulling the data in, and I'm saying, oh my God, Bernie's getting wiped out. He's losing by 26 points. So I got halfway through, and I stopped. Opened a bottle of wine, and I got a little loaded, cooked dinner, went to sleep, and the next morning I woke up and I go, oh my God. He's only ahead by 13% now. And I go, oh my goodness. If you look at the precinct vote, okay, he only lost it by 2%. But 500,000 people were forced into provisional ballots because they were micro-targeted, okay? And then they call the election, and they say, okay, now we're going to do the random audits. We're going to audit the first 65% of the vote. Okay? Well, how does the stack work? Most of the state and your large municipalities here don't look at the vote by mail signatures. They have a machine that does it. Okay? And secondly, if those Russians or whoever it was hacking these voter databases, maybe they were after your signatures. And maybe in some of these places that who does look at the signatures, they don't look at the envelope, it's a picture of an envelope. So how do they know that they weren't looking at a picture of a picture? This vote by mail is another problem on the horizon, and I work very close with Bev Harris, and we're very suspicious, and we understand how these machines rank out or whatever. So the point is that you do have a problem, and I know that Jim's going to go partly into this because some really bad things are happening in legislation that they want to protect the right to cheat, and they want to keep that 35% as the adjustment number. Okay? Because once they go ahead and stack the front end, and that machine knows, oh, you're voting for somebody, oh, gee, we're going to have to look at your vote by eye. So it may be counted. Pull that down. Okay. We all kind of know the problems that we have here, decentralization, machines hacking, this software crap with these corporations and all these other things. Those are the problems. We need to start working really towards the solutions and how we can go ahead and overcome these things. These are the statistics. We have 200 million registered voters. We have 13,000 voting jurisdictions. We have 187,000 precincts. We have 52 different models of voting equipment, okay? And like I said, it's all mostly in the hands of private enterprise. And that is a huge problem. I want you to know I was at DEF CON with that lady right over there. That was, no, I'm sorry, you went, was in another place we were together. More over a little bit? Okay. So anyway, this is a quote, and it talks about the machines, and so I'll let you go ahead and read it. I don't want to read it for you, but it's certainly a very big problem that we have to go ahead and deal with. This one right here is this was at DEF CON. I met Jake, and he's the one who organized the village and suggested he used to work in the Obama White House. And you know, anybody who, like he says, anyone who says that they're unhackable is either a fool or a liar. Because that's what it really comes down to now. We really do know that. We know that when the Help America Vote Act passed in 2002, that they passed it and there was no security, okay? You know, the whole system was really run by a system of, you know, hiding this information. We know that the logic and accuracy test, as far as I'm concerned, they're a joke. Volkswagen proved that, didn't they? My God, They built what, 600,000 diesel vehicles? And it would pass emissions every time? Well, what makes you think that the election directors, when they said, I mean, John, we know the system is really good because we did a logic and accuracy test before and after. Well, it's a program, and it's going to work right at this moment. You can go ahead and set up the parameters of that. And that is what we fear is happening, and that's why we have to have real auditing, and that we really have to go ahead and deal with this. Security through obscurity. Like I said, that's a heck of a trick. That means don't tell anybody it's hackable. That's what it is. Like I said, when they put the whole system together, that is basically how it was built. The security was, first off, when we go into ballot images, you need to understand how the old system worked. Okay? We were all in school in the United States, most likely, and you took the Iowa test. And that Iowa test was a little bubble, and you took a pencil and you marked it. You made a mark, and IBM invented a program that would sense the technology, and it would sense it. Okay? That's how the old system worked. There's really good news. It's gone. It's gone extinct. And that opens an opportunity for you and us that makes me very excited. Because you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Very famous man who did that quote, okay? A man not so famous below said, ballot images change that model, and that's why they're hiding and destroying them. They are destroying them. They are hiding them. These images, working with hand-marked paper ballots, were first started being used in Florida. Why Florida? Well, Florida and Arizona are really two really great corrupt states. I'm in Arizona, and I always tell people the difference between elections in Arizona and Florida is like the people who ran them, the developers. And you know, these developers, in the very beginning, one sold swampland and the other one sold desert. In fact, they were the same people who went back and forth, okay? And so the gamesmanship that's played there is quite serious. And so basically, is that if we're going to go ahead and make a change, we're able to go ahead and do it because the new technology is here. Digital images, okay? What you're looking at right now is the DS850 and the DS200, okay? In fact, those are the machines that were used in Milwaukee and Waukesha and other counties. And in Arizona, we have 11 of our 15 counties are using machines to create images. Fact is, 10 of them are of this right here. Once Maricopa switches, which they will switch in the next couple of years, will probably be 98%. I am projecting right now, in this country right now, 40% of all the machines are creating ballot images. Michigan just switched over. I would say by 2020, 80 to 85% of all hand-marked paper ballots in this country will be ballot imaged. Now I want to explain how these kind of ballot images work. And right here is a, oops, let me go back because I was trying to get a video to play here, and I don't know why it didn't play. Because I want to see, this is a DS850. It does about 300 ballots per minute, okay? And you can see it's actually, on this upper part, it's actually taking a picture of both sides of the ballot at the same time. It's also putting a number onto the ballot, if the inkjet is installed, okay? And it's putting a special number on the image, and it's mating them for auditing, because it was a banker's machine originally, because they got to track the documents. In fact, all these digitals are made to do this. Oh, they see it went to the top slot, it made a bad shot. And it's going to say, oh, you're going to redo me again, okay? And it's quite fast, it's quite efficient, and it really does work pretty good for marrying the ballot image, or pegging it, to the actual ballot for auditing. And you know, the interesting thing about it is I'm going to go to the next machine right now. This is the DS200. It's a lot slower. It only does 12 ballots per minute. Both of these I shot, by the way, in Wisconsin. The 850 I did in Waukesha, and then I did this in St. John's or something on the other side of the state. And this one does about 12. You see it stop. It's actually taking a picture. It's a slower process. And if it's not right, it will ship it back up and say, no, I didn't take right, or whatever. And so, because we're going to get how important these images really, really are, okay? And here's an image, okay? As you can see, there is the decision. Now this stuff up over here, they purposely do the background of the ballot, the blurry, because they don't want it to recognize that it's just language or information or whatever. And this is the serial number 1443. I stands for image, okay? And then you have, this is a cast vote record. And how they identify that is serial number 1433, same number, but it has a C. C for cast vote record. And that's just for one ballot. And now I'm going to take you and show you how they put it into the database. Because I love this database, because I used to work with the D-Volt databases, and they were pure garbage. I mean, they were so easy to manipulate. You know, I must have spent thousands of hours looking at these databases, because my county was D-Volt. And on that. Now, this is the cast vote record, and this one has 176,450 rows of voter records. One row is the complete ballot. And if it's a primary, well, you can have 4 different parties running. You could start off at A, and it could end up at HH. But one row is one ballot. Now, there should be a hyperlink there, and you click on it, and it pops up the image. And you can actually take the image and match it. And then once you're all done auditing, in fact, what you really should be able to do is to go ahead and you know, I'm honored that Bev Harris has turned around and called this the Brakey method, because I've been playing with images for a long time, and it's not a thing I invented, I didn't, okay? But it could be used to go ahead and to prevent election fraud, because we want to take away their impunity to steal, okay? Preserve and make the public ballot image. Peg the ballot image to the actual ballot with numbers. Make sure the ballots are a public record so any person can look at them. What do we want them to do? We want them to take the images per precinct and put them online. And then people like us can say, I'll tell you what, I'm going to download my precinct ballots, and then I'm going to go online and get an app. And then I'm going to take one image and print it out. And then I'm going to fill out my app. And then I'm going to watch my computer count. Not one race, all 20. Okay? And then when I get done with that, then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to use Phil Stark's random audit system. And I'm going to go ahead and pick a few images and go down there and say, hey, see that number 1433? I want to match that, a couple, just to make sure they weren't photoshopped. Now, when I say photoshopped or whatever, is that, you know, hand-marked paper ballots are very unique because they're hand-marked. Every mark's a little different, little pressure, different ink, different scribble, you know, different colors. It could be all different ways or whatever. And so if we wind up putting a system like that together, then we've been successful in taking their impunity. And, you know, advanced digital technology. The ballot image to be put online, like I said, and I want you to know, I didn't make that up. San Francisco did. They put out a request. And the answer that they sent from ES&S back, as you can see, it says all ballot images can be exported and posted to the department's website. Okay? Most of the country's destroying them. The people in San Francisco must be concerned about making elections, what? Transparent, trackable, chain of custody, and verified. That's a good thing, don't you think? That's what we need to have happen. That is where this thing can go. Now let me tell you what they're hiding. This stuff has been out for a long time. It was first used in Florida because Florida is not, it does not have to use federally certified equipment like California. California is one state that you certify your own equipment, and I think it's great. I really do. Okay? In fact, I found a report that California looked at the ES&S 850 and the 200 and said, hey, there's no way they're coming into our state and they're going to go ahead and put these machines on the internet, because when they use a virtual private network with a SIM card built into it, okay, that's what we found happening in Wisconsin, is that they had SIM cards. And you know, I'm not worried really about Russians. I'm worried about insiders. One person in my state, and I've been doing it for 13 years. It took me 11 years to mold this guy out. that I had one guy who was programming in my state, and it's in this report I was telling you about. He was programming 13 out of the 15 counties, and he was being paid on a 1099 IRS format as a subcontractor or a special person, and you get paid on a 1099. That makes it harder to find this guy, okay? He was loading the databases through telephone phone modems, because that was the old system. If he had SIM cards, well, they could do it the same way, except it would go through the internet and load them. And you know, and that's what kind of blew me about Wisconsin when I did find out that they did have SIM cards built into the DS-850, 200, not the 850, the 200, is that I was quite shocked. I didn't want to believe it at first because that's just the easiest way to be able to cheat as possible, because all you got to do is be the insider and have the code, and that's what we fight. But getting back to this, but look what it says. You know, it's a pretty dramatic statement. The system, when it first came out, in their advertising they said, gee, this is a really good system for auditing and going ahead and adjudicating an election that's in trouble or it's too close. You want to, you know, really figure it out. Because with these images, you can set them up with the system and say, okay, we got a real close election, it's within 2 votes or whatever, we have to do a recount. So now let's start looking for the undervotes, and now let's look at voter intent. Because voter intent in a very close election is very important. And that's how this system was set up to use. Instead, they're destroying it. In a case in Tucson, Arizona, I had to sue Pima County because they made me believe for 3 elections they were saving. I was asked by a friend not to go ahead and file litigation. Let him go ahead and do his thing and see if he can work something out, because maybe we don't have to sue him, Brakey. You're too quick to sue people. Well, only governments, really, you know. Must be crazy for doing that. About 13 of them in the last 13 years. Last year I did 3. I sued the whole state of Arizona over what happened in Maricopa, suppression of 150,000 people. Bernie Sanders wins the precinct vote by 59%. Hillary Clinton wins the vote by mail by 60. Then the provisionals come in, Bernie wins those by 63. So which 2 out of the 3 pollsters are you going to believe? Because there's a rule of large numbers. You don't have splits of 40%. You just don't have it. Usually your precinct vote and your vote by mail comes together like this. I used to say, oh my God, look at this. This one's 6% off. No, this is you know, pretty incredible stuff when it comes right down to it. You know, this right here, I think it's pretty interesting. I mean, like I said, this goes into the fact that this is from the San Francisco proposal. The DS-850 scanner produces a digital image and a cast vote record that is tied together via an index number sprayed onto the ballot. Like I said, they're removing the inkjets. Okay? This provides greater transparency and potentially for RLA to be conducted on ballot images rather than physical ballot if desired. You could do both. And you know how much it would cost? Put it online, let the people know what's going on. Because I'll say this, you know, I am a Democrat. I'm maybe not a very proud one. I used to be years back. And you know, now I'm a populist, progressive, socialistic leaning, and I'm still a Democrat, and I just became a precinct committee man because I think there's a chance that our party has fallen so low that we should be able to say to them, hey, make elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verified. I was at a meeting in Chicago in 2006 with Mimi Kennedy, Brad Freeman, and we were dealing with all the heavyweights of the lawyers of the Democratic Party. And they all said, if people really knew that these elections were no good, you know what we fear? They'll stop voting. No, Brakey, no, Brad, you need to help us get more people to vote. It's not happening. I think a lot of people are waking up and saying, what am I doing? I'm voting in a system that's a black box. And basically, maybe I'm wasting my time, and because they think I voted a certain way, that we're giving them things to do. I think that the Democratic Party needs pressure. The Democratic Party needs to know that we demand elections that are transparent, trackable, and publicly verified, or maybe we just might stop voting. Again, it's in here. And I want you to know that we are working on a proposal nationally, and I don't know why that jumped like that all of a sudden. Let me get back to where I was. But we are working on a proposal that we're trying to put together a plan to go into 15 states. and put teams out there to go out there to educate, to go out there, investigate, and to turn around and get ready to litigate. Because these are public records and they're ours. And we want elections that are verified. Not verifiable, verified. Because that's the only way we're going to de-corrupt our system. And with that, I want to thank you all. And let me see, yep, that's it. Thank you very much, and I hope that we use this thing and we can move. Thank you. And I'll get rid of this now.
Thank you very much, John. I just want to say that I've been so impressed by seeing the work you've done on ballot images, and I was so dismayed to find out that many election officials are erasing them.
Well, you know, if I just add one thing to that, I got to tell you what my judge said in the case, okay? This is really kind of cute. You know, my judge in this case was not really super computer literate. And he said to the prosecution, to the defense team, Pima County, he said, Pima County, let me ask you a question. I'm not computer literate. But if you take voted ballots and then you make photocopies of those voted ballots, what makes you think you can destroy them? They're in the chain of custody. They're a public record the minute they were put out there. And these images are anonymous the minute it hit the ballot box, okay? And then they made arguments and said, well, gee, you know, somebody could sell their vote. Well, what I said, well, good, we should stop vote by mail. That way the guy can't come to your house and pay you for it, okay? Well, what happens if they write their name on it? Well, I guess they broke the law. Why should I not have a right to be able to verify our democracy? There is no argument for not getting these things. By the way, it's just a matter of time before you guys get them. Right now, you only have 2 counties that have them. You're one of the lowest states that do have this, you know, for your size. And I predict by 2020, somebody's going to cough up $500 million, because I imagine that's what it's going to cost. I do hope that you're all wise enough to make sure that when you do get these machines, don't buy a $6,000 pencil. And what I mean by that is they want to sell you machines that will make the mark for you. That's easier to forge. We want your mark on those ballots. And by the way, they'll save a lot of money, because $6,000 pencils are very expensive because you need a lot of pencils in a precinct. And it's not verifiable in my book because the images can be played with. Again, I'm sorry for taking more time. Thank you.
I'm delighted that you took that time. So I'm going to now talk about a different topic that I actually hadn't putting much of my attention into, because I've been looking at the resistance within our country to having transparent elections. And for a while, I believed, along with some other election integrity activists, that this idea of Russian hacking was really a red herring. And I was looking at the issues of, you know, there are very strange things that have happened, you know, between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton and the exit polls and this kind of thing. And then I did research on how the Clinton Foundation received made a grant to Dominion Voting Systems up in Toronto of $2 million in the year before our election in 2015 for, and you know, there's kind of a pay-to-play thing that has been brought out with the Clinton Foundation. So I had been putting my attention there. I'd also been celebrating, together with Bob also, some of the people, the election officials who've done such a wonderful job in supporting American and democracy and election integrity. Among them, Carolyn Cernich and now Kelly Sanders of the Humboldt Transparency Project. Right here in Humboldt County, California, we have one of the best possible ways to have an honest election, which is that ballot images are counted open source. Everybody can count them in Humboldt County. And this is a wonderful system that I'd love to see further. And in 2010, the Institute gave an award to Carolyn Cernich, Kelly Sanders, and also in Yolo County, trying to remember her name. Well, no one can help me. What? Well, anyway, there's another person, another registrar that's done a really good job, which was also featured in Lulu Friesdat's film. And what I have observed is that when people do hand counts, there's a lot of excitement from the citizenry. They're eager to help. There's participation. There's involvement. And another thing that I was seeking to promote, which we talked to both Carolyn Cernich and to Virginia Martin this year. She's from Columbus County, New York, where they count all the votes by hand, as well as Carolyn Cernich, who counts ballot images open source, is that they are really appreciated. So I was seeking to promote, and still care about this, as a quality of life issue for registrars. Because if election officials are deeply appreciated by the people they serve, you know, my tendency to feel is their health will be better, their longevity, their sense of meaning and purpose, and that they would like to do this. And both Virginia Martin and Carolyn Cernich had shown that it was actually very economic, and it didn't take much time, and they both got celebrated by the counties they're a part of. But now moving on to something else that I had not been that involved with, about the Russian hacking, and I want to say I had some extensive conversations with Brett Kimberlin of Justice Through Music as a nonprofit, but also protectourelections.org. Again, let me repeat that, protectourelections.org, about what has been happening with the Russian hacking. And I learned a number of things, and they are in articles, so you don't have to think that, you know, that that this is private information or that I'm making it up. But one of the things that I discovered, and John Brakey has confirmed it, is that there were a lot of Russians who were posing as Bernie supporters and creating dissension within the Democratic Party. Okay, so that was one of the things. There's also been real evidence that Russians broke into the email system, although they deny it, of Hillary Clinton, and so, you know, I knew that. But in terms of breaking into election systems, you know, what we heard was, no, they didn't really do anything. They tried, but they didn't succeed, okay? So that was what we heard from election officials, and what we heard from the NSA at one point. So first of all, I want to say that there are emails that the Kremlin internet system was recently broken into by the Ukrainian cyber force, and there is a fair amount of evidence of business dealings, as you may have heard even outside of this, between the Trump you know, company and the Russians. So, and there's a man named Sauter, S-A-U-T-E-R, who has been involved with money laundering together with Trump in certain ways, that he says that both he and Trump are going to be cellmates sometime soon. But anyway, so first of all, there's been interfaces going on undercover with this area. Now, I also want to mention now about the election systems. At first, as I said, I saw this as a red herring. And I really felt that, that Americans were doing more of it. But now, what happened was in May of this year, first of all, they said, well, they got into some of our systems, but they didn't do any damage to our votes, okay? All right, that was the first thing, and that happened before May, all right? And it was kind of like we were able to turn the knob of the door, but not open it. That was a little phrase that was used by election officials. And please remember, election officials generally don't want to look like something happened on their watch. And even secretaries of state really want to trust the systems that they bought. And the companies are trying to defend themselves too. Dominion, ES&S, all the others, and present themselves as not hackable, okay? So the whole system is directed towards telling you, no, there was no problem, because everybody's salaries depend upon it and their job promotions, okay? So, but what happened in May is that a young woman, 25 years old, named Reality Winner, who worked for the NSA, revealed a document, and she gave it to this thing this organization run by Glenn Greenwald, who was the reporter who reported on Snowden, who's now living in Brazil because he doesn't want to get messed with by the United States, another American. Anyway, he reported it to the NSA to ask if this was a real document, and he did not take off the identifying marks that enabled them to determine that it was Reality Winter. Well, when this document that revealed that 39 different election places had been broken into by Russians with a system called VR Systems, which was one of the systems, she was immediately arrested. And she is now in jail for 4 months and more coming, no bail, and the document which has been publicly printed out, is not allowed to be talked about by her or her lawyer in the defense of her, and it's actually been published. It was published by Intercept, and so you start wondering, what is the NSA doing here? So, you know, we know that Snowden, if the U.S. ever got a hold of him, he's in jail, you know, and the U.S. put tremendous energy into trying to capture him by causing the plane to land and all that sort of thing. And he's now in Russia. His girlfriend's joined him in Russia, and it's been a while. And Glenn Greenwald was definitely hassled. And so, you know, what is the NSA doing instead of, you know, recognizing, you know, that an important document that said 39 different election systems had been manipulated is now in jail and unable to defend herself. This becomes a big question mark. And what comes to my brain is that the NSA would really like you to feel a sense of trust in our election systems, because anybody who happens to show something could be a problem with Russians, well, we don't want to talk about that, and we don't want you to believe it, because we want you to keep coming to the polls, all right? And we want you to trust that here at the NSA, we do a very good job on protecting you from Russian hacking, okay? So I feel pain and dismay about this, and something that is interesting to contemplate is Glenn Greenwald, who now lives in Brazil because he was harassed by our government, and Snowden, who now lives in Russia and who would be arrested as soon as he sets forth on U.S. soil, you know, they may be actually possibly working for the Russians at this point, because if you get so badly treated by your own country and you've got a lot of talent, what might you do? And I'm not saying this is definitely happening, but it's very suspicious to me. And it tells what happens for me, again, as usual, is whistleblowers are treated terribly in our country. Absolutely terribly. And hey, U.S. government, you're causing us to have more problems with how you treat these whistleblowers, okay? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And I do want to let you know that I learned about this attack into VR Systems, which is one voting machine company in Florida and North Carolina. I learned about it a while ago, and I didn't give it that much credit. But now that I see that the NSA has imprisoned this woman, I'm paying a lot of attention to it. And Ian Sancho, who's been another registrar who I celebrate him as a hero, was the one who received this information from the FBI just before Trump was elected, saying that the Russians are hacking into these systems of VR, and he actually announced it to Brett Kimberlin at that time, and I thought, well, maybe, you know, this kind of thing. But now, with seeing how our country behaves, once more now I tell myself, the majority of the companies in our country, the election machine companies, the registrars, the secretaries of state, and now the NSA, and are focused on us believing in our country and our systems. So here's now, I hate talking about horrible things without presenting a word of good hope, okay? So I actually have hope. And this just came out yesterday, okay? And this was something that we weren't allowed to talk about. There was a bill that is coming out that will be part of the defense budget. And we are now looking at election security as a part of defense, okay? And it will be on the defense budget. And this is called the Graham-Klobuchar Amendment. And Deb Klobuchar is a senator, Minnesota Democrat. And then Lindsey Graham is the Republican senator. And they are jointly sponsoring a bill that has been kept in secret up until now. But it is now being presented, and it includes cybersecurity and funds for cybersecurity. Also, it demands paper ballots for states, and it also talks about very detailed audits, okay? And so if you want to feel like you can have a little action today, when you go home, you can send a note of thanks to Lindsey Graham for putting forth this amendment, because I knew that the only reform we'd ever get would have to be bipartisan, okay? And Deborah Klobuchar from Minnesota, both senators, about this bill. And we hope, since Trump is very oriented towards the defense systems, and that he will pass this and not veto it, okay? And even though he wants to defund and dismantle the Election Assistance Commission that was certifying tabulators, this amendment may help us, okay? And I'm thrilled that it's bipartisan. So I think that completes my presentation, and we will now move on to Jim Soper.
I'm going to go over there. I prefer to stand.
All right. Again, keep your questions for the rest of our time after this.
want to get the mic fairly close too.
Yeah.
Jim, are you going to be showing slides on the
No.
screen?
Good evening, my name is Jim Soper. I am delighted to be here with everybody. Thank you, Laurie, for inviting all of us and gathering us. I was asked to talk about some vote by mail action going on in California, but this is a day of announcements. There's going to be one or two more. First of all, you can reach me at jimsoper2@gmail.com. I am the author of a website called countedascast.org. If you're sitting at home, you may want to bring that up in your browser. COUNTEDASCAST, as every ballot should be counted as cast. I have the honor of being co-chair of the Voting Rights Task Force in the East Bay of the Bay Area. And I have the honor of announcing, I just learned, and then I'm going to introduce a couple of people. I learned a couple hours ago that very probably, I haven't seen the official announcement, but the Voting Rights Task Force has now stuffed its 5th internet voting bill in 6 years in the state capital of Sacramento. The requirement that the Secretary of State file a report on whether or not internet voting is possible, or more, how to do it. Apparently that section has been pulled from the bill. And this is the 5th time in 6 years. I would like to have Dale, Gail, Richard, and Carl raise their hands and just thank you very much. There's going to be champagne soon at our meeting, which will be, by the way, for those of you who are local, and Dale and Gail come in from Marin to downtown Berkeley at Next Space at noon on Sunday. And there'll be a notice to call a number and we'll get you in. We'd like to have more people in. We're very busy. That's fresh off the... I just got that email a couple hours ago, and we've been waiting, we've been expecting, and this is major accomplishment. California votes on paper ballots. Almost everybody in California votes on paper ballot. We can tie that back to action that the Voting Rights Task Force took in Alameda County in 2005 and 2006, and with that, the election of Deborah Bowen, who took something that was pioneered in Alameda County and put it into state regulations. You're voting on paper ballots, in part because of what we were doing 12 years ago. So this stuff actually, I want to be optimistic, we can have an effect. It takes a lot of work, it takes focused work, but we can have an effect. I will invite later questions about internet voting. This has California's become the epicenter of the effort by the industry to introduce internet voting into the United States. And we've been fighting it off for 6 years, and we're going to continue doing it. But that's not the topic of this talk. So we'll go on to more of the talk. It's about what changes we've seen going on in vote by mail in California. As is different from much of the country, more than half of Californians vote by mail. If you're not aware, all of Oregon and all of Washington State vote by mail. This is all West Coast stuff, but it's going to be trickling in to the East and the rest of the country. And what we're seeing is, over the past few years, an expansion of vote by mail, making it easier. And this has been pushed largely by the Democratic Party, the top people, because they believe that vote by mail expands turnout, increases turnout, and when you increase turnout, the theory is you help the Democrats. Well, we like the Democratic Party often. We like democracy more. And so there's some things that we have to take issue with. One of the things that happened, for example, is that a couple of years ago they passed a bill that said that the vote by mail ballot doesn't have to arrive on election day. It can arrive by Friday, so long as it's postmarked on election day. So that gets more ballots in. But these ballots now, and this is important, are arriving after election day. And then we saw a bill in 2015 called SB 450, and it does a number of things, and there is, on my website on the left side, you'll see a menu of items. You can look this one up. It's going to establish vote centers that will be open in counties 10 days ahead of time. So you can go in and vote 10 days ahead of time if the county opts into the entire package. You'll be able to register right then and there, or re-register. So if you wind up coming in and finding out, oh, you were registered in the Peace and Independent whatever party and you have no idea who they are, you can change your registration then and there. Provided that the registration database does not get hacked, and I'm not too sure about that, but that's a separate issue. The big thing in this, again, it's all in one, vote by mail ballots will be sent to everybody, whether they ask for it or not. So we're 50% voting on vote by mail. It's going to expand to what, 70, 80%? More and more. So we're seeing this expansion, which is, we are not happy about this because there are a lot of problems with the chain of custody with your vote by mail ballots. And I won't go into all kinds of detail, but there was yet another bill passed last year, AB 1921. Now, before, the law said that you can only bring in a ballot for somebody if they were a member of your household or family. They rewrote the law. Now you can literally drive up with a truckload of ballots. Walk in and say, count them. No questions asked, no ID, no nothing. So where there were chain of custody problems before, now they're coming by the truckloads. I came up with a phrase called automated forgery. This sort of came up, and this just feeds into this. All these companies have your signature. Your supermarket, your drugstore, your credit card company, they all have your signatures. And John has in part uncovered that there are these little operations on the side that contract out to the counties that are preparing and printing ballots and printing envelopes and sending all these vote by mail ballots out. Well, if they can get the signatures, and you print the signature on the ballot, along with everything, you got their address, you got their ID, you got everything, and you know how they're going to vote. Automated forgery. It's a setup. And one of the things we need to do more of is start to dig into these companies and find out who owns them, because I think some of them are not such good guys. What are they doing? What security is in there? How do we know that the signatures are valid? Well, we were talking about machines looking at the signatures. Well, if the machine is programmed to sort of identify a machine-printed signature, etc., you got a huge problem. Yep. So we have all of these ballots coming in that we really aren't too sure about. Tuesday, I get a call from Ray Lutz in San Diego. Ray Lutz sued San Diego County last year over the issue of how many vote by mail ballots are you going to count or not count, audit. We have a procedure of, you roughly explain, you will audit 1% of the ballots. And the law clearly says, thou shalt subject to audit vote by mail ballots. With no qualification, that means all of them. Now, San Diego and Los Angeles County were only auditing those ballots that were part of the semi-final official tally. Well, I even got questions from people who've been involved and said, what the hell is that? When they announce a result on election night, that's your semifinal official tally. Any ballot involved in that tally on election night is semifinal. And LA and San Diego and a bunch of other counties were just auditing those ballots, those votes that were announced on the first night. Never mind that we had tens or hundreds of thousands of provisionals. Never mind that you have 3 days for ballots to get in on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They weren't auditing them. And we're talking 4 million ballots?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, we're trying to dig up some information now. It's not readily available, and we're going to have to go county by county to get an idea, but 4 million ballots is not a bad estimate that are not being audited. Now, what happened is that there was this Bill 8840, originally was about dealing with envelopes, vote by mail envelopes that don't have signatures on it, and what's the procedure for dealing with it. And we read that and okay, next. There's hundreds of bills going through Sacramento just in elections. And after the Assembly voted for 840, that was on April 20th. The authors introduced an amendment on May 23rd saying explicitly, you don't have to count any ballot that is not in the semi-final official ballot, that is in the election night reported total. Everything else coming in later, 10, 20, 30% of your vote is not subject to an audit. We learned about this Tuesday. And part of the problem was that what we're learning is the people behind this were telling legislators, oh, this is about the provisionals. Well, the law says nothing about whether or not thou shalt audit provisionals. Ray Lutz is pursuing that in court, and God bless him, I hope we get a victory out of that one too, but so far, not there. The thing is the vote by mail ballots, and a judge said, thou shalt count the vote by mail ballots, all of them. And now they're trying to rewrite the law to override the judge. This is what's going on. And unfortunately, we spend too much time in Sacramento, we see this stuff. It's kind of hard. So what's going on is that the Progressive Democrats of America, Voting Rights Task Force, Ray Lutz's Open Ballot Initiative, and some other organizations that are launching, as of about 5 o'clock this afternoon, a campaign to get AB 840 recalled from the Senate and pulled back into the Assembly because it's been changed. Now, I've never heard of this being done, but I talked to people who really know and they say, yeah, they can do it. We need to put public pressure on the Assembly Elections Committee, because they're going to need to get a spine to say, yeah, this represents a big change from what we voted for. There was nothing about auditing vote by mail ballots on the bill that we voted on. And now it's in there and it's significant. So one, if you're Californians and you are especially constituents for Mark Berman, Matthew Harper, Ian Calderon, Evan Lowe, Kevin Mullen, Jim Patterson, or Shirley Weber, they're all on the Elections Committee of the Assembly. And especially Mark Berman's the chair, and he's the primary one. That needs convincing, and he's a freshman. This is his first year, and we need to kind of help him stand up. Educate him. We will have something posted on Voting Rights Task Force California on Facebook. I'll get something up this weekend and count it as cast about numbers to call, but the short thing is to write, if you do nothing else, write to Lori.Barber at asm.ca.gov. She's the Secretary of the Assembly Elections Committee.
How do you spell Lori?
Lori. Beat Barber as in barbershop. B-A-R-B-E-R. Lori.barber@ASM, which is the assembly.ca.gov. We need to flood that committee with demands that they call the bill back from the Senate that was modified on the Senate side. I mean, there's the reconciliation committees in Washington, and they consider that normal. I haven't heard much of this going on, but we're going to have to stand up and say, hey, this one you got to take another look at, because there are serious problems with it and serious implications for our elections in California. I have one other note here. One other note, once it gets back there, I talked with Ray this afternoon. If it gets back in the committee, we're going to say, hey, you need to audit the provisionals too.
Yeah.
And hey, if you can have vote by mail centers where you can early vote, and you're also getting vote by mail ballots, don't count the vote by mail ballots until you know that they have non-voted in the vote center. In other words, the in-person vote should override any vote by mail ballot, especially when you can fiddle with the signatures. I won't give credit to Mimi Kennedy for bringing this issue up, and she consistently does, and she's right. So I will stop there. Any of us will be glad to entertain questions, and especially also on internet voting, which is, people don't get it. That is the biggest long-term pernicious threat to this country, to our elections. We have to keep fighting that all across the country, and maybe if this bill gets through and they demand paper ballots, internet voting doesn't have paper ballots, so it gets blocked. So please, we need to support that bill too. Thank you very much.
So for all of you who've been sitting here, and for those of you who are online, I know we have quite an audience online, we are now available to answer some of your questions. We've been having some questions come in already, and I do want to let you know that both at sunrisecenter.org and also at trustvote.org, we will post all the different websites of our wonderful presenters here. So hopefully we can all expand how we're in touch with each other, making a difference in our country. So with that, Bob received a question already, and we're going to start with that. And if you have to take a stretch or something, feel free to do it, you know, those of you out in the audience, but we really want to go for the questions. Thank you.
All right, I was asked, please repeat what happened in a lawsuit against Edison Research Group. Again, Edison is really the monopoly exit pollsters in America. They were Edison Matosky, and since we're on the internet, we did pursue him after they were incredibly wrong in 2004. In his last comment to our statistician at the Free Press, Ron Bayman, was, fuck you. Like, how could you get it so wrong? Can you shine some light on it? Well, they work for the major broadcast media, right? They work for ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox. They work for CNN, and they work for the AP, right? That's the consortium. So, again, they work overseas as well, where they detect fraud. I sued them to have them declared a state actor. Our theory was simple. They cooperate with the secretaries of states, particularly in the key battleground states. They get special permission to be close to the polls to conduct these exit polls. They get to be closer than 100 feet. They share the data, and there's a understanding. Their methodology is the following. Whatever comes out of the machines, no matter how ridiculous, no matter reports of flipping, no matter how far they deviate from the exit polls, which are scientific, with a margin of error of 1%, they will accept the official results, even though they're statistically improbable, over what appears to be irregularities in the voting. Because of that, I said they were state actors, and we have a right to look at their polling methodology, which is increasingly, and there's a direct correlation, the more we've used electronic voting machines, particularly DRE and private software, the more their polling has become really deviant and unexplainably bad. So, with that in mind, I said we should have a right to that, and the judge ruled against me. He said they're private contractors who, and you have no right to look at their methodology. But remember, it's their exit polls, their adjustments to the exit polls, no matter how ludicrous, that sells the election to the American people. They have this cluster factor, and then they have to re-weight it, and they never explain why these polls detect fraud outside the U.S. but can't detect fraud in the U.S. And their solution is to simply adjust them. So we lost the suit.
So we have Jonathan Simon calling in?
Yes.
Okay.
Jonathan? Are you there? Okay, yeah. What you're seeing is delayed about 15 seconds, so...
Let me also, I just want to say, Jonathan Simon was going to be with us and got
Hold on a second. Laura's
detained,
introducing you.
and we're going to get him in through Skype. Jonathan Simon is the author of Code Red, so...
Hold on. Okay, hold on 1 second.
You want it?
Okay, Jonathan?
well-known
you should-
exit.
you should-
Am I gonna have to knock down the
election
sound on this thing?
Yes, you're gonna have to turn your sound down on your computer. Because there's about a 15-second delay in what you're hearing online.
Right, so just give me when I go, and then I'll go, because I can't.
You can go right now.
Okay, hi, I am Jonathan Simon, I'm Executive Director of Election Defense Alliance, I'm the author of Code Red, Computerized Election Theft and the New American Century. It's a book, and it's a book that I am now updating to take in what, has gone on in the past year, which is pretty dramatic. I missed a good part of this evening, unfortunately. I was in transit, but I know that, things have been talked about that are happening on the local level, things are happening in the state, various places in the state level, and I tend to be a gloomy, big picture guy. When I look at the warp and weft of the entire, what's happened to our democracy and what's happened to our elections in the last 15 or so years under computerized voting, and see that what we're seeing would be almost, it would be hard to imagine, would be verging on impossible if there weren't some invisible hand driving it. It just doesn't make sense by any standard calculus or geometry of politics. There's been a warping factor and a veering factor. So, getting from there to proving that this or that election was stolen or it was done in this way or by this person or group is very, very difficult, because we're fundamentally, as analysts and as forensics investigators, we're denied access to the voter marked ballots, we're denied access to the memory cards, we're denied access to the code on these machines. This is all proprietary and corporate. So that's what's being prioritized is corporate rights and over any transparency. And as a result, we've just sort of seen these 15 years of veering and very strange politics. And I look at that and I look at, okay, what is going to change this? I mean, the latest example of it was in the Georgia 6th election. election, which was particularly egregious from a forensic standpoint. Tremendous disparity between verifiable voting, which was vote by mail, and provisional ballots versus DREs, paperless DREs. Just an astounding, shocking occurrence on election day, where you would expect the rigging or the manipulation to take place, and the numbers just scream that something was radically wrong. Went from a Democrat being well ahead to somehow having a 16-point margin for the Republican on election day when the votes were counted unverifiably on DREs, cast and counted. And of course, this was an election with great national significance. It was another one of those proxy elections that, gave supposed indication of how things were going to go in 2018 and even in 2020. So it was a great significance, and it was run on machines where there's really no basis for trust in any of it. And so, after 15 years of squawking and screaming about election after election after election, we're presented with something like that, and any attempts to bring it out in the media were pretty much squashed. There is a lawsuit going on, but our record in court is very, very one-sidedly bad. And so, that's the gloomy big picture. Today, there was a New York Times article that I'm just getting a chance to go through now, and I don't know if it's been discussed before, but it is a pretty in-depth look at the fact that very little investigation has taken place into what actually happened in the 2016 election, that there, evidence of Russian meddling or interference with all these state systems and registration systems and whatnot, and nobody seems to want to actually look at it. Local governments, state governments, and certainly not the federal government, they basically say, well, no, we see no evidence that votes were actually changed, and they don't see any evidence because they have made a command decision, quite literally, not to look for any, not to impound any memory cards, not to impound any code, not to impound any voter marked ballots. So it's kind of hard to find evidence if you take that over-the-head approach. So this is kind of what we're up against. And it was good to see in the Times today that, they're being called out mildly on this. But I guess my contribution to tonight is to frame this as a big picture and say, we're in an age where if it's not apparent, completely apparent, it's becoming more and more apparent that in a way the public is the enemy. That there is a concerted effort to withhold information from the public, at the same time trying to find out as much information. This is the, government and corporate entities find out as much information about us as possible as citizens, as individuals, our voting patterns, our shopping patterns, our geography and whatnot, genetics, but to withhold information going the other way so that we can't know about our elections and we can't know about how the votes are being counted, and we can't even get any reasonable inquiry or inquest into that. And this is the setup. This is what we're looking at and what we're facing. So, a positive bill might pass here. Maybe a given county gets religion and decides to be a bit more transparent there, or maybe they ditch their DREs. We might even decide that, well, the Russians are meddling around in the store, and so we're going to get rid of supposedly get rid of internet-connected voting equipment and maybe get rid of DREs. And, most of these positive steps, and Lori warned me that I have to come up with something positive, and I'm still working on it, and I'll try to do it in real time. But most of these positive steps are what I would call a slow boat. And the question then becomes, in the age of Trump, and environmental irresponsibility. Will a slow boat be fast enough? How long do we have to play with? If we wind our way to transparent elections in 2040, is that good enough? So my sense is, no, we haven't made a whole lot of progress. I've reread just very recently in the course of working on my own book, revised edition of Code Red, I've reread Steve Freeman's quite superb book, was the 2004 presidential election stolen, which came from 2005. And it's a brilliant book, and it essentially proves that, yes, the election was stolen. I mean, every statistical indicator aligns, and we made mincemeat of the efforts to debunk the accusation or the allegations that it was stolen and the evidence that it was stolen. And he did a brilliant job of it, and a lot of forensics people got on board with that. And we had an extremely solid case. In 2004, we were given far more information than we were given in 2016 or given it and can expect to be given at any time in the future. Edison Mitofsky, the polling firm that did the exit polls, put together an extensive self-inquiry, an extensive report in which they discussed variables such as within precinct disparity, and they discussed selection bias, they discussed response bias, they discussed refusals, gave us a lot of data that they interpreted a certain way, but we were able to get in there and say, no, your whitewashing interpretation doesn't work, and this is why. That was in a book that was written in 2005. We're now 12 years later, and we're doing the same thing. These elections, if anything, more egregiously rigged when they have to be, such as Georgia 6. I would say we can't prove it, but malodorous doesn't begin to describe it. Red flags all over the place. And so I guess what I'm contributing here is to say that, one way or another, this is on the public, this is on the people. These are our elections. It has to be rooted in a public will and a public determination to reclaim public sovereignty and reclaim the right to have an electoral process that can be verified, that can be trusted. And that's difficult. Election processes are not easy, especially with the form of government we have where instead of having one one principal election, such as they might have in the Netherlands or France or, places where they have a parliamentary system, we have all these various different elections. It becomes more of a challenge to count, but not impossible. And we as a country have wanted our democracy on the cheap. I'm not saying the people have, but the people haven't objected sufficiently to this idea that we can, spend billions, then into trillions of dollars, bringing democracy to foreign lands, and hardly anything on our own election, so that the first thing an election official and administrator will say, well, we don't have the money to do it. We don't have the staff. We don't have the money. We have to do it this way. We have to get the cheapest machine, and we can't even replace the machines that we have that have security flaws that go back to 2002, as they do in Georgia. And that was what was doing the counting in the Georgia 6th special election. And so, democracy on the cheap in a country like this, where the prize of political victory is so enormous, it's basically the highest stakes game in the world, and you want to run it on a shoestring budget, this is something that the people have to get in there and say, no, this is worth more than that. How do they do it? Well, I mean, Jim Soper is doing it at the State House and in counties around here. Humboldt County is doing it. Columbia County in New York is doing it. There are few bright lights out there in places. Michigan, there's an organization there, but it's not enough. And my belief, and this is not shared by everyone in these election integrity movement. There are very few beliefs that are shared by everyone in the election integrity movement. But my belief is that this is going to take public insistence, and that the best ultimate mode of public insistence is economic. Because, we do live in a capitalist economy and in a capitalist culture, and really everything ultimately seems to come down to money. And we're the spenders. We're the ones who can say, no, we're not. We're not spending. We're not buying these things. We are not gonna buy a single thing that we don't absolutely need, outside of baby formula and the like, until you draft legislation that says we're going to have an observable public vote counting process, or until we can vote by hand, counted by hand on a special referendum to introduce that kind of voting process. And obviously organizing masses of people to do things like, inconvenient things like essentially go on consumer strike or tax revolt or work strikes, general strikes, is challenging. But this is how Europeans and people in other places of the world made change happen when their governments became unresponsive. And it's something that we've kind of lost touch with here, but I think we're going to have to go back in that direction. And we do have the tools for organizing in the sense of social media, Twitter, and we have a lot of people with big megaphones who, if there were an opportunity, I think to sit down with some of these people, be it a Mark Cuban, or it could be many people who have many followers, and sit down with them and say, look, is this not issue number one? If you care about anything from the whales to economic injustice to militarism, you name it, then Black Lives Matter. Is not this crucial to that agenda? Having people elected who actually represent the majority of Americans, who I still believe are pretty decent people. This is the nexus by which all that is being overwritten and negated. So I think we really do need to go in that direction. That doesn't mean that's the only thing we do. I mean, there's a lot of tentacles to this, and I'm in constant contact with the New York Times and the executive editor there. Maybe some of the squawking that I've done, in one way or another, contributed to an article like this. We can all do that. We have to be nudges and pests, but at some point, it's got to come out of the public and from the public. It's ours to basically to win back. If we expect the office holders who have been elected by this corrupted system to somehow change that system, particularly the majority, the ones who are in the majority and in the catbird seat, and expect them to kill the goose that's laying their golden eggs, we're going to be waiting a very, very long time. And I just don't think we have that long to wait when you look at what's being done to us and in our name now, and what the prospects are going forward. And I'll leave it at that. And thanks for listening.
So thank you, John. So we're reopening to questions again, and we've been getting quite a few. We're also getting some from our audience online. Looking forward to it. So I would like to have you, Bob, address some of these.
Okay, let me read the question. How do you respond to the argument that the difference between exit polls and the final tally is explained by voting differences between early voters voting by mail and day of votes? How do election verifiers deal with this? Okay, they actually do exit polls on the early ballot. I don't know if people knew that or not, but those are all public records. In fact, anyone who's run for office, right, one of the first things you do, and I have on more than one occasion, I had the privilege of running against John Kasich, now governor of Ohio, for U.S. Congress, is early voting, those who vote and cast ballots. In fact, you've now got even more accurate exit polls because you know exactly who the people are that voted by mail or who early voted. And as long as your methodology randomizes them and makes sure it's representative, you've got even more accurate voting. Not that I don't admire the Trump forces and Karl Rove, who created the story, that by having these early ballots, you've now created a system that can't be audited. What they've done, as these machines were introduced that couldn't be verified, the black boxes, is to create a whole mythology about how the polling is no longer reliable, when the reality is it's the machines that aren't reliable. And for example, and it's not just the machines we vote on, it's the databases that contain the people that are registered to vote. I've had the audacity to say, I don't believe that the Rapp family in Ohio that owns Triad, that invented the butterfly ballot of infamous shame, and that is the leading donor to the Right to Life movement, is neutral. I don't think Michael Connell, who created a private system to send Ohio's vote to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and is one of the leading activists in Right to Life, is neutral. I don't think Jeff Averbeck, who secretly counted the vote, a born-again, evangelical, right-wing, right-to-lifer, are in fact neutral forces. I'm not going to pretend that these are just people maintaining voter databases when they purge over 1 million people, and almost all of them are from the 9 urban centers that vote overwhelmingly Democratic. Not going to play that game. Everybody knows, that it's BS. These private, incredibly partisan companies. Remember, we know that about Diebold. Wally O'Dell's letter went public. I intend to deliver the electoral votes in Ohio to George W. Bush. They were counted on his GEMS, his General Election Management System, with their fractionalized voting. He glitched 10,000, Diebold glitched 10,000 voters, all in Cleveland, that voted 81% for Kerry. These are not mistakes. These are partisan, private companies secretly programming our computers and secretly purging and deregistering voters. That's what's happening. And don't believe that somehow the early voting is distorting things. The early voting is in the exit polls.
If I could just add one thing about that, because I work on statistics all the time, and one thing the average citizen can do is to look at your vote by how it came in. Meaning, when I examine an election, I look at, okay, here is all the vote by mail, and I want to bring it how it was done. And then I look at the precinct vote. And then I look at and say, wow, 40 points different. There's something wrong. And then you look at the election and you start saying, if I was a hacker, an insider, where would I steal where I have impunity? Because that's what they look at. I've been doing this for 13 years, and I'm getting pretty damn good at being able to tear a system apart. And then I look at it, well, that theory doesn't work too good because that would take a lot of people, okay? If I can't get it down to 1 or 2 people in a machine, okay, then we got a problem. So basically, give a quick example. I told you about Bernie and Hillary, the 39-point spread. We had an election. Our governor is a cokehead in Arizona. Now, when I talk about cokehead, I'm talking about the Koch brothers, okay? And so I got you there, huh? It's just like me saying, I'm no longer an election integrity activist because I know the system has no integrity. I'm an ET. Now, you're probably thinking extraterrestrial. No, it's election transparency. It's the solution. Anyway, you can look at the numbers and you're going to say, wow, look at this. And this part of the vote, which is not auditable, because when they run these high-speed scanners, they run thousands of ballots. They're not sorted, and they are just big boxes. And, you could be in LA where they got 2,500 precincts or something, and you have a box that holds 1,000 ballots. You could have 1 ballot for each one. It's an easy steal. If you can't get at them and you can't look at them, you're depending upon a machine to make that decision. And so I call it looking for the splits. How did they split away? Because you use the rule of large numbers. When you have large numbers, you'll see a trend. That's what I used to see. That's where you want to look and watch out, because eventually they're going to get rid of the precincts. And when they do that, you're really in trouble. Okay? And it's going to be easier because, you know, every election I find just a little different tweak that's going on. And, you know, this whole 2016 election cycle, boy, they did use that voter database. They really did. And to me, the heist was done at the primary. It was the year of the outsider. Of course, Hillary was painted as a consummate insider, and Trump was the outsider. And of course, they feared one big person. That was Bernie Sanders. To me, the election was stolen from Bernie. If it was an up and up election, Bernie would be president right now. And the numbers show it if you look into the primary. His book right here, The Strip and Flip, lays a lot of it out. Time it got to California and Arizona, they add the stack to it.
Okay, sure.
So that's my point.
And this is this is the Trump edition.
Oh, it is? Okay.
This is the second edition, which does have the recount in it.
Okay,
Which-
thanks.
Thank you.
So we got another question here?
Yeah, we got a couple of questions. Any truth to the idea that some people who voted for Trump were embarrassed to admit that to a pollster over the phone pre-election? That's one question. Again, this is called the shy or reluctant voter. It's a phenomenon. It mainly occurred historically when you're a massive outlier. For example, you're voting communist in Waco, Texas in 1954, and you don't want a butt whooping, right? So often those with extreme views do reluctantly, right? They don't want to tell the pollster, or they walk by the pollster. Okay, the key things to remember. Increasingly, the pre-election polls aren't traditional hardline randomized polls. A lot of the polls are increasingly being done over the internet with randomization that's questionable, right? They're not very scientific. The pre-election polls, most of this is caught within the margin of error. In fact, the traditional standardized, randomized, representative hardline polls, and there was only about 15 of them or so, were all within the margin of error, on average about 2.16%. And the margin of error is usually between 3 and 5. So that's what picks it up. The margin of error usually picks it up. Now, the exit polls, right, you're not asking people how you're going to vote. You ask them how you just voted. And overwhelmingly, what we found is that people are proud to say how they voted. If they're reluctant, they're going to walk by you. But that doesn't matter if you've got a randomized number and you know how many votes you're supposed to count. As long as you're keeping, it's the same thing when you call somebody on a phone, right? If they don't answer the phone, it doesn't wreck the survey. You go on to the next randomized number in the phone call. The same thing is done if someone is reluctant to respond. So as long as that is kept representative and randomized, meaning every voter has an equal chance of inclusion, it really shouldn't impact outside the margin of error the polling results. So yeah, somebody may be reluctant and walk by a pollster, but you just count the randomized number that's representative of the men, women, the blacks, the Hispanics, the minority in that area, and as long as you stay consistent to your methodology, it's not a real problem. What's more of a problem, look at Wisconsin. Hillary, people are coming out and saying 48.2% said they voted for Hillary Clinton in Wisconsin. 44.3% said they voted for Trump. Essentially, Trump wins 47-9 to 46.9 by 1 percentage point. So instead of losing by 4, he wins by 1. Now this can happen once in every 614 elections. You would expect that sort of result with the narrow margin of error. Now, what's been curious since 2004, and was curious in Florida, why is it with extreme accuracy the polls can predict in the red states, in the blue states that aren't battleground states, what the election's going to be? So they're within the margin of error. But every single time it goes to a battleground state, it's massively outside the margin of error, and it's all in one direction for the most part. Right? There were 28 states that had exit polls. 24 of them, there was a slant towards Trump. In 13 of the states, there was a shift towards Trump that would be labeled fraud by our State Department. It was significantly outside the margin of error. One of them was for Clinton, 12 of them is for Trump. So the asymmetrical nature, the one-sided nature of the margin of error, which is the same thing that happened in 2004 in that election, right? There were 11 battleground states, 10 of them inexplicably went for Bush outside the margin of error. Now, all the other states were called fine by Edison Matoski. So we're in a situation in the battleground states that are being targeted where it looks like somebody is gaming the system. You don't need to game the system in California or New York. You know who's going to win those states. You don't need to go to Idaho and Montana. Trust me, the Republicans are going to win there. So why are the exit polls always right in those states, but not right in the battleground states only? And why isn't there an even distribution? Why aren't 5 going to Kerry if they're wrong and 5 going to Bush? Or why aren't 6 going to Clinton and 7 going to Trump? Why is there a unbelievable, essentially what's happening when Trump wins one in 164 election, Trump's hitting the lottery in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, in Florida. If somebody is hitting the super lotto on the same night over and over again and nobody else is hitting it, you've got to look into that.
Okay, so Jim, did you want to? Jim's going to answer a question over here.
Okay, Jim, I got a mic for you right here. Okay. Let me feel it.
Hi, Jim Soper again. Question is, the potential problems with all mail-in ballots were addressed. Had that been seen in Oregon and Washington? Well, let me first state that I am not an expert in how they process vote-by-mail ballots in Oregon and Washington. I am not even an expert in how they process vote-by-mail ballots here in Marin County. I live over in the other county. We have 3,000 fiefdoms. 3,000 counties, 3,000 fiefdoms in this country. And they all do it differently. So I don't even know what Marin's doing. For San Francisco, I might be a little bit more familiar, but I can't talk about Oregon or Washington. Other than I sort of heard that they probably set up better coordination with the post office so that the ballots are tracked through the post office. That helps solve one of 20 problems. The problem of, are they checking the signatures to see if they have been printed or not? I don't know. Are they checking a lot of things? I don't know. We don't know. And Bob, have you ever heard of an exit poll for vote by mail ballots?
I know they randomized, and the exit poll companies, in fact, do contact the people who vote early and who vote by mail, because it's public record.
Is that valid? I mean, I've never heard of them. An exit poll is when you leave the polling place.
Well, it's not the, here's the problem with that sort of exit poll, is the longer you wait to contact anyone, usually it affects the margin of error. So after they vote, they're contacted, but it's not a traditional exit poll outside the polling place.
It's less reliable. I think we don't know. I have family that lives in Oregon that seem to be satisfied with it while the officials do the usual thing of everything's great. We know what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I haven't looked carefully at Oregon, Washington, or any of the other 57 counties in California. So we don't know, and we need to be checking how they're checking, and that information can be very hard to get. I cannot give you a number for how many vote-by-mail ballots came in by election day in the state of California, because we looked, and how many came in afterwards. We have to dig it up. So there's a lot of digging that needs to be done, and so the answer is, I don't know.
I know a little bit about Washington, okay, and I want to tell you how I know. In the court case in Tucson, Arizona, since it was a new issue with these ballot images, they went ahead and they turned around and said, what state can we use to benchmark off of? And they choose the state of Washington, because their constitution says you can't look, okay? And then I called up and I had a long talk with Bev Harris. And, Jim March, when we were getting these ballot images, well, let's look at other states. And we said, let's look at the state of Washington. Boy, there's a good suit up there. And he says, maybe we ought to contact people so we get a suit going up there. And Bev said to me, no, John, bad idea. Do you know who runs the system in the state of Washington that tracks every ballot image? Bob Gates. Not Bill Gates, Bob Gates, the defense secretary. Okay, and by the way, it looks, and I haven't seen it, and it's not a fact because I didn't see it with my own eyes, but from what I understand, that they have secret barcodes on the ballot and it has your name on it. And that's the reason that you can't look. They're tracking. And this is a pretty hissed thing because I do believe that we have the right to a secret vote. And that's why Pima County choose to use the state of Washington, saying we use their constitution because this is a new thing. And because it's too new, nobody's sued on this except for me thus far, and we want to do it all over. But Washington was a bad idea because, if you want to deal with Bob Gates and their whole secret thing and all that right there, I'll tell you the truth, I think I'm more fearful of Bob Gates than I am fearful of the Russians, okay? And, so we decided not to go ahead and endeavor into that. My advice was given to me, John, you're doing a great job. Work in areas where you have a chance of winning, and you might not get killed either, okay? And that was kind of the advice. But it is something to be concerned about. And Oregon, the only thing I know is that they do, and I think I have one thing also to clear up with the question, is that if you want to find the document, you can go on Trust Vote's site. It's on their site with a hyperlink that will take you to this document that you can download. Please, if you really want to get an inside view from a person who spent 13 years, it's really 13 years of work in this thing, to be able to give me the rear view mirror to be able to look historically back by working with distinguished people like these people here, all these and others I work with across the country. It's important that we all learn to be really what I like to be. I call myself, and there's some people, first off, when I heard it, I didn't like it. A newspaper said, well, Brakey's really quite the social gadfly. And I go, holy smokes, they're calling me a gadfly. And I don't like it. So, but before I get mad, I think I better Google it. And I Googled it, and I go, well, if the shoe fits, I'm going to wear it. And I tell people that I am more close to the mic.
That's fine. Also, if you could name the document that people.
Oh yeah, well the document is called "Publicly Verified Elections Are Key to Decorrupting Our Democracy," and it's on Trust Vote's site right now. I posted it this morning, right? On Facebook.
On Facebook.
Yeah, and we can
that particular site.
Get us to the other site.
Trustvote.org on Facebook.
That's right. That's where it is. It's also on any other election site in the country, because I blog across all of them and share information, you can find it. But getting back to it, you know what, the social gadfly thing, I'm proud to be a social gadfly, and I walk around and I teach the 7 C's. The 7 C's are pretty simple: character, capacity, credibility, civility. I call you a bad name real nicely, okay? Citizenship, our rights, country. I love my country, okay? But the big C is courage. But before you step up and get arrested or do something, because I'm a big fan of Naomi Klein, no is not enough. It really isn't. We really do have to go ahead and stand up. But before you decide to do something stupid, you say to yourself, what kind of a character has the capacity to do something really stupid and destroy your credibility? Because that's basically all I have to sell. And that's where my value is my credibility. And if I do make a mistake, I'll be the first one to stand up and say so. But I'm very careful to make that decision. So I'm proud to be one, and Ray Lutz is, and I think you're quite a social gadfly too, Justice Gadfly, and all of us are. Because we need to be, as Socrates once said, the one that comes around and stings them right on the ass and give them some reality and wake up our neighbors and do what we can. Because we are running out of time. I really believe that if we don't take back the elections by 2018 and 20, and use what we know, and be proactive, that we're going to be in a situation when 2020 comes around, they're going to redistrict again, because there's 3 problems in this arena. Election fraud is real. Gerrymandering is the 3rd one. The 2nd one that is a real problem is voter suppression, very real. And now with voter suppression, they're micro-targeting, they're using the voter database. We can deal with the first 2. They only can deal with the redistricting by 2021 after the census comes and they start dividing, because really I would say that is the big rob, is that when you know that more people voted Democrat in the House of the United States than Republicans, but they control a large majority, and that is because they know how to draw the districts because they're in power. We have to take that back. That's hope. And so if you're not a social gadfly, I hope you become one, because we love being that. And to stand up. Thank you.
All right. Let me briefly, a couple more, but let me briefly talk about mail-in. You know, Oregon and Washington are questions, but usually the polls there are in line. Think about what the real problems are with mail-in ballots. Let me begin with the obvious. In the 2016 election, Secretary of State John Husted in Ohio refused to send out to 1 million voters, overwhelmingly Democratic, early voting paper ballots, thus making it much easier for people who are Republican to get the ballots. And he did this legally. He justified it by reinterpreting, by sending pieces of mail to inner city homes, and if they weren't answered twice, they didn't get an early ballot or were purged from the voting roll. He purged over 1 million people, 50. What else has happened with mail-in ballots? Think about 2004. Yeah, they mailed out ballots to everyone in Cincinnati. They left John Kerry's name off. It made huge news. Hey, it was a mistake, okay?
Okay.
Cincinnati. So, again, when they done this in 2008, we got a call from the post office saying, a black postal worker who was supporting Obama, who calls the Institute, says there's 10,000 pieces of mail that are coming in from Columbus, which voted overwhelmingly for Obama. And they had 1 stamp on them, but they needed 2. So the Board of Election accidentally printed a 1 stamp slot when it needed 2. So I actually reported it to the county sheriff, who was a Democrat, and said they're illegally holding up mail and they're interfering in a federal election. And lo and behold, the Board of Election agreed to put the 2nd stamp on. And the guy in charge at the time was Matt Damschroeder, who was a well-known Republican operative, who had done many things, included suspended for taking a bribe in the name of the Republican Party from Diebold. So we've had tremendous problems and disconnects in the mail And that's something we should consider. I mean, what we don't do in this country is practice equal protection for all people. Some people get purged, right, after Houston purged people who hadn't voted in 2 federal elections, in the last general election or last congressional election, and in the primary. In the rural counties, they interpreted it to be 2 federal election cycles, which was 8 years. So if you're urban and black, you've lost your right to vote. If you're rural, you have it. So those are the type of obvious gaming of the system that we need to look at. And also the spoiled ballot issue, right? In 2004 in the Toledo area, there were 10,000 ballots that weren't counted because the machine counting calibration was wrong. People put them in, they shot back out, including Marcy Kaptur, the state representative. So, I mean, the calibration of the machine, which we saw in Michigan with the broken seals and the bad machines in Detroit. So all of that is creating what are known as spoiled ballots. Disproportionately, the spoiled ballots are from urban centers.
I guess I got one question. Here, okay, a question is, which 15 states do you plan to go into, investigate, educate, and litigate to make ballot images public? Well, I have a couple of states I want to tell you what the criteria is. I'm not going to name them because I want everybody to be a little paranoid out there. Okay? Because, I find that sometimes paranoia is a pretty good thing when you're an election official, or whoever's doing this, because they do steal with impunity. And when I say impunity, I mean they know they're not going to get caught. It's like, having a devil on this side, an angel over here, and the devil says, hey, you can do it, you're not going to get caught. And the angel says, hey, you might get caught. And they're going to say, by who? Who's looking? Nobody knows what's going on. This system is built to steal. Really, from what I see. But I'll tell you what the criteria are, okay? It's not going to be a very deep red state. It's not going to be a deep blue state. Because when absolute power is held by one party for a long time, they control the judiciary, and that is one of the biggest focus. What is the litmus test that we're looking at? Voter registration is one item. How easy it is to vote and register in your state, okay? How judges are appointed, because realistically, we're looking to make good law, and that's where we want to be careful where we go. And because, if you go into a case and you got cheated in the trial court, do you want to appeal and take a loss on to the next level? Because in a trial court, it means nothing if you lose. It's the appellate part that has the most damage. So some people are dummies and they appeal even though they think they should win and they're taking a chance. No, win and then let the other side appeal because they will. And so we want to be selective into that right there. There are other litmuses that we're looking at, and so that's how the selection is going to be made. And of course, one of the selection is, do you have machines that produce these images? And it's shocking that California is probably one of the worst states that doesn't have them. And you will, I think it's, and you probably know more about that, because I guess it's what, $450 million or something like that for the state of California to make the switch, Jim?
Next year.
Next year?
Yeah.
Well, we know one thing. You're going to get machines that make images, because the old stuff is gone. Very good. That's a good thing about it. I'm done.
Okay, another question. There seems to be a breakdown between enrolling legitimate top-level respected media to keep this issue in play on a broad level, and the notables in this room. Being told we haven't had success because it's not a defensible reason to stop trying. There are too many groups who would become allies if approached in an organized plan of attack. Now, obviously, I agree with that. And how many people saw the James Woolsey co-written editorial op-ed in the New York Times? Woolsey says we need open source, and there has to be paper in every machine. I mean, as CIA director, I didn't agree with virtually anything he did, but he appears to be able to get the obvious as an intelligence officer, right? Open source if you're using any code, and you actually have paper in the machine. to some extent, that is a breakthrough, which is the sad state of affairs we're in. But again, as much as the top-level media, what about the Wall Street media? The Wall Street media, which makes a ton of money, particularly when Democrats are in power, they've done well with better than when the Republicans are in, who tend to be a little erratic. Daily Investment News, Business Insider, and Forbes, since 2012, have all been on our side, have always said that the technology is ridiculous. When we at the Free Press were credited with breaking 3 of the 5 factual October surprise stories, when we said, look, friends of Mitt Romney bought Hardinner Civic, the 3rd largest voting machine company, it was Forbes that came to our defense. When we said they shouldn't be doing secret experimental patches, they're illegal, it was Business Insider, Daily Investment News, and the computer magazines, Computer World, Wired. Wired has done an excellent job on these issues. Again, I don't know why the main newspapers don't like to, risk, their reputation by saying that shocking news, right? That apparently, if you use computers to vote on, there's something they're called computer programmers that can program the results. I mean, it's so obvious, and that's what happened at DEF CON, right? They showed how easy all of this stuff is to hack into. So I'm not going to wait around for the elite media who's afraid of being called, conspiracy theorist. In the real world, I'm a criminal attorney. I see conspiracy every single day. Virtually every client who comes in is not acting alone in doing his illegality. There's a whole bunch of people they're conspiring against. So for us to pretend that, it's like, okay, well, 3 or 4 people stabbed Julius Caesar simultaneously. There wasn't no conspiracy. It's absurd. Conspiracies are like common colds. They occur all the time. And when what's at stake is the leader of the most powerful nation on earth with troops in 161 of 203 nations with this tremendous arsenal and budget, why wouldn't you cheat if it came down to a few battleground states? All the data indicates people cheat in elections. They cheat in 6th grade class president elections. They cheat if the system is not in place for prom queen. They cheat. And then you've got to set up a system that's transparent and you can verify, right? I mean, so you've got this elite liberal media, essentially reversing Ronald Reagan. Trust, but don't verify.
If I may add to that a bit, about a third of the successes that the Voting Rights Task Force has had a large element of dumb luck. I said before in 05-06, we got Alameda County to use paper ballots everywhere. The proposal for that was put in by the Republican supervisor. He didn't talk to us, it just sort of appeared out of the blue. Okay, and what he had said is that we had the VPATs, get in this roll of paper that you had a touchscreen machine and then the VPAT, and he said, okay, for the November 06 election, when we start with these brand new Sequoia machines, the registrar is going to have to count every ballot on the VPAT, all of them, for November 2006. Well, the registrar said, gee, those paper rolls are really hard to count. So what he did is he shoved the touchscreen machines into the corner and just passed out paper ballots, which you could scan and so on. But we picked that idea up, and in her regulations, she got elected that election in her regulations in August 2006, said thou shalt use paper ballots, period, except for the disabled. And they take the one touchscreen machine per precinct and shove them in the corner. Somebody comes in and says, I have to use a touchscreen machine, fine. But almost everybody in California votes on paper ballot because of an accident of sorts. The other one that was even more glaring is California did not have any kind of statewide recount law until about 2 years ago. And what happened? There was a statewide race for state controller where a 3-person race, they take the top 2. The guy who came in 3rd, John Perez, and he lost by, I don't know, 700 votes in a huge state, 14 million votes or something. He happened to be the Speaker of the Assembly. And all of a sudden, because he lost, it dawned on him this might be important to have a statewide recount. Luck. And next year, AB 44 passed, and it has a ridiculous barrier. The statewide race has to be at, Bob, I don't know if you've heard this one. The margin of victory has to be at 0.0015%.
That's almost as bad as Arizona.
Okay, but we got something out of dumb luck, but we were there and we were in there saying, yeah, do this. So we have to be in the game. You have to be in the game. Because things are going to happen that you don't expect. And if you're not in the game, you're not going to be able to move the ball forward. So that's all.
It sounds like you're lucky because you're out there working so much. I mean, that's the key.
That's the key. You got to be out there.
Yeah. So again, somebody raised the issue of Department of Homeland Security and DOD, the question of transparency if they're controlling the election. This actually was raised yesterday at the election integrity pre-conference put on by Pippin Norris, who is from Harvard, and Judd Chode, who's the chief election official in Colorado, who, by the way, is moving to automatic voter registration with an opt-out. So everyone at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles will be registered, and then they'll get something later to see if they want to opt out. And they're going to move to the social agencies as well to automatically register people there as well. But he said there was at least 57 attempts to hack the system. He's also, voted the leader of the state election leaders nationally. So he's the leader of their organization. He said they got at least 57 reports of a hacking attempt during the election. And they know this because they were contacted by Homeland Security, and Homeland Security said, yes, but we can't give you any details. So, I mean, this is going to be a problem. We've got to make sure that any bill that goes through, Jim and others keep talking about the need to make sure you know what's in the bill. But if this classifies, all the material, and it becomes, part of defense secret or Homeland Security investigation, right? I mean, we need the exact opposite. And I always give this story. In 1994, I had the privilege of being an international election observer in El Salvador after a bloody and vicious, nasty civil war that some of you may recall. When we met with the Arena, the death squads, the Mano Blanca that killed priests and nuns, and the guerrillas, the FMLN, the only thing they could agree on for the election was big, large, see-through box, transparent box. Neither side trusted the other one not to stuff it, and they wanted it opened before the world, including the cameras of the media, and counted on the spot. Full, absolute, complete transparency. I still think that's the gold standard.
The French do the same thing, I guess.
So I'd like to address a question that came up here about the Graham-Gobashar amendment. They were asking whether it's going to cover something besides cybersecurity. And yes, the plan is to support states that don't have paper ballots to have paper ballots and provide funding for that. And then also to deal with audits. And, just how you deal with an audit is a whole nother question, and I hope will have some effect. In looking at the document that you could find online, it is it was put together by the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology, and it's the Graham-Klobuchar Amendment. That's Graham, Graham -Klobuchar, Klobuchar Amendment, and they are also, feeling that they need to raise funds to help lobby this through as well. And you can go to their website, which is ICIT, and I found it before. They are estimating it'll cost to create this security between $38 to $50 per voter, and I'm just saying, they're hoping to get government support. And I want to mention something about stealing databases. My first exposure to this was in 2012 when we were looking at Melissa Data Systems and its relationship to Smart Tech. And basically, they can keep track of your voting records, okay? And we had an investigator call with an idea, can you help us with the campaign? And Smart Tech gave a special price if you want to have lists of voters who seem to be voting the way you'd like to see, because they had kept track of what people had voted for. And they were selling that at a higher price than the data systems, that didn't have the track of the voting records. And, if you want to solicit people, and you happen to know what they voted for, you can be more successful. All right, now there's also evidence that Russians have gotten databases in a number of places. And I seem to remember, was there one in Arizona?
There's 3 counties that we know that were broken into.
By Russians, and there's also Illinois and North Carolina and Miami and Broward County. So, what particular desires Russians have to see who gets elected could very well be a part of the plan. And so that's why this amendment can be very important, that includes the cybersecurity. And we're really hoping that it's not just a Democrat-Republican issue anymore, and that this will really get Republican support. So I also wanted to mention, again, something we could not put on the our thing, trustvote.org is the organization that John, Bob, and I are connected with. Counted as cast.org is what Jim Soper is connected with. Electiondefensealliance.org is what Jonathan Simon is connected with. And freepress.org is what Bob Fitrakis is connected with. And we all connect with each other also, but I wanted to say that once more for the people online who are asking for that.
And John Brakey?
My site
And yes, thank you.
is electionnightmares.com, because it really has been
Thank
a
you.
nightmare. And even though we're changing it back to Audit AZ, and that if this thing comes together, we'll have a new site called Elections, Audit Elections USA. And like I said, audit is an acronym, Americans United for Democracy, Integrity, and Transparency.
And John is also the editor of trustvote.org on Facebook and really keeps it up to date. And thank you, John.
Well, I'm very glad to.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so do we have any more questions or?
It's not really a question.
Oh, so Laura Chamberlain over in Illinois is making a point to say that the data breach in the registration system in Illinois was not the Russians, and I think that's fine. I know that Americans also steal databases, and Melissa Data Systems was one of them in 2012. So I hope that addresses what you wanted to say, Laura. And I guess I made a mistake, although this other article says the Russians did it. And this is what always happens in this issue.
If I could just jump one more thing on here, is that, I was very early on, and, I sued the state of Arizona, and I claimed that the database was breached. And I started doing research, and I started getting, because since I hooked up with the Sanders campaign, I was contacting their IT guys. And then all of a sudden, Seth Rich dies. Now, Seth Rich, everybody knows who he was. He was the head of voter outreach for the DNC in Washington, D.C. And I said to myself after he was murdered, my God, he's a guy that I'd want to talk to, because he must have been getting all the phone calls from the IT guys saying, hey, I just had thousands of people that were Democrats a week ago, and they went to vote. They found they were libertarians or they're independents, mostly in states with closed primaries, okay? And I'll tell you, it happened in this state, okay?
Big time.
Big time. And, a lot of people don't know this. I'll tell you other statistics. This whole report I have in this document. How many people here realize that over 1 million people who voted in that primary never voted for a presidential candidate? That's amazing, isn't it? You knew that. Yeah. It's amazing numbers. I mean, I never see something so bizarre, and that's why, like I said, that's why I call it the stack, and I borrowed the strip, the strip and the flip, and because it really fit. They just improved on your model, Bob.
Well, as you recall, I came in ahead of time because
Yeah.
many of us were predicting exactly what was going to happen here. As it happened in Ohio and happened in New York, the systematic sabotage of the Sanders campaign. Also, I would be remiss in pointing out, we really need to look at the 1996 Times cover, bragging about how Americans went over and rigged the Russian election and got one of the most unpopular, chronically drunk men on earth, Boris Yeltsin, elected, even though he may have only had a 2% approval rating, but a $10.5 billion loan from the IMF, which allowed him to systematically buy votes everywhere. So I don't know where the Russians got an idea to intervene at all in our election, but probably from the fact that we've spent the entire Cold War period, remember in the 1970s, when they went before Church's committee, the CIA, they admitted to, quote, 5,000 benign operation. A benign operation is election rigging, which they thought was far better than a bloody, vicious coup where you kill 800,000 ethnic Chinese in '65 in Indonesia. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff, it's not just the Russians we got to worry about. Look at Seidel. Who invests in Seidel? Carlyle Group, Booz Allen Hamilton. I mean, you've got a company counting the overseas vote that's very close to the CIA and mysteriously came out of the Free University of Barcelona. I mean, trace the provenances of these companies. I mean, the Orosevich brothers, where did they come from? Chuck Hagel, for God's sake, part owner, of the predecessor to ES&S. So, as much as we need to box out the Russians, we need to get the keys back to our election from the small group of private, corporate, partisan enterprises,
Totally.
that can rig these elections. The elections belong to the people.
Here's one good question I'm going to take, and it's, can we find a smoking gun and blow away the election manipulation?
Oh, the whistle.
Whistle. We do. and we take it to the Attorney General's office. I've taken 3 or 4, okay? And it's incredible. In 2015, there was a bond election in Pima County, and I went down there and I filmed it. And I filmed them doing a logic and accuracy test. It's the first time we used the 850. And in 2008, I helped pass a law with a Republican to put cameras in all of the election departments so we could see what was going on. So I'm sitting there and I go, you know, I'm going to turn on my TV, I'm going to write this report, I'm going to plug my computer, and I'll watch that election department just for the heck of it. My God, I caught him breaking and entering into the system. I couldn't believe it. First off, after the logic and accuracy, we put seals and we take all the stuff, we put it in this box, and nobody's supposed to go in there, okay? And so I go, oh my God, what am I going to do? I got it on film. I took my camera, I was snapping pictures, and I got the film from them eventually. And I went down there and I saw the election director in the backyard. He said, Mr. Nelson, I need to talk to you. And he says, what is it, Brakey? He says, hey, I had a question. Is those cameras really live? He says, John, our camera system is so good if a mouse ran across the floor, it turns the camera on. I said, well, good. Here's a picture of you guys breaking into the system. And he goes, what? Well, he didn't know that I knew that he was in the room too, because after they broke in, they went out and got him and brought him in. He went up to the computer, looked, and he goes, good. And then he gets in a chair and he goes, looly loops. Then they print a report and all of that. Okay, so I go down there and I confront him. So he said, well, I'll go check it. He leaves me outside the door for 30 minutes. I should be able to go inside because they're in the machine. We have the right as the public to be there. So he comes out and he says, John, we're going to go ahead and we're going to redo that logic and accuracy test. Yeah, my guys did a dumb thing. They shouldn't have done it. And I played dumb with him, And so we talked for a while. And so the next morning, all the media was there. And they're confronting him. And he stood up and he lied. And he said, well, why did a person go in? And until the reporter asked him, he says, well, the guy, even though he's been a long time, he forgot to print the 0 report. Well, that was a lie. I had the 0 report. It said 10:31, same time I filmed them making it, okay? And there was another lie I can't think offhand. It's in this report again, and also the link to the video you can watch him breaking and entering into, okay? There was another bond election, okay? That's what started me back after 2004. In 2006, I caught them rigging that bond election, and that's where they used the Harry Hursty hack. That means they took the memory cards and used positive and negative numbers. And it's not like I didn't have a confession. We did. We even had the machine that they used to rig it with. And the machine was only used for 2 things: measuring the moisture content of corn and rigging debolt memory cards. Okay? That was an 8-year case. Folks, you can't catch them afterwards. We got to be proactive. We got to take away their impunity. A lot of these people in these election departments, I see no evil, I speak no evil. I was in Maricopa one time, me and Jim March, and Jim's one of the best geeks I ever worked with, okay? And he finally fought to get his binoculars in there. Wouldn't let's have cameras, and he's looking at the wiring, and he's falling from this computer, and he's going around the room, and all I go, oh my God, it's plugged into a laptop, and there's a guy there. And so we made a big scene, and we said, hey, we want to bring in cameras, come over here, Mr. Stewart, come over, he still works there. You need to see this. Oh no, I'm not going to look. He walked away and ran. We were threatened to be arrested by Sheriff Joel Pyle's people, okay, making a scene. And this is the kind of stuff that goes on. And if we don't somehow make elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verified, we're in trouble. If we do not get on top of these goddamn vendors, okay, you talked on it real good, Jim. You laid it out really well. But these vendors, let's talk about it. They're programming the computer. Well, somebody's got to, I guess. I don't know why they have to. Then they're printing the ballot. Then they're mailing out the ballot. Then they're receiving the ballot. Then they're verifying the signature. My God, this is ridiculous. That's why that we have to fight to make elections transparent, trackable, publicly verified. I'm going to help everybody I can to pass legislation in different states. I'm going to go ahead, if we put this thing together, is to have 3 people in each state. And I'd love to find a Jim, a Bob, and another Brakey, okay? And because we all come in at different angles, and to build that team to do that. And it's going to take to support a lot. And what you all can do in California, help Jim. Help him get this legislation handled. Make sure that we buy machines that have inkjets in them, that they marry the ballot to the ballot image. You want to save a lot of money? Put the images online. Let the people do their own counts. Okay? Let them pull some random ballots. And let them go ahead and say, now I want to make sure you didn't Photoshop this sucker. And make sure that these are hand-marked paper ballots. Do not let them sell you machines that make the mark for you. Okay? That's easier to counterfeit. That's the mission of the people of California, because, you know, as Jim says, you are going to be switching these machines in the next couple of years. By 2020, do you think we're going to have new machines in California? Possibly? 50-50 or what? You're a big state. We need you to switch. Don't let you take it over here. Tell us what's going on.
For Californians, there's a bill going through the legislature. It's in the Senate now, AB 668. And it will allocate $450 million to the purchase of new election equipment. If the people of California next June vote the $450 million bond issue to allow counties to buy this equipment. So if it makes it through the Senate and if the governor signs it, it'll be on next June's ballot. And I am very ambivalent about this because that's $450 million that in general will go out to the Dieboldts of the world. At the same time, our election officials have to run the elections. And in places like LA and San Francisco County, which had 60 items on the ballot last November, in counting this gets to be a little logistically tricky. We did succeed in getting an amendment into the bill that will get money to San Francisco and LA County to develop open source systems, which was a big win, and I really have to compliment Chris Giordano, president of the San Francisco Elections Commission, for being extraordinarily nimble at getting that amendment in there. He did it in 2 days, which for city government is just incredible. The other amendment that's important is that the county can lease the equipment. If you buy, you're probably stuck with it for 10 years. If you lease it, you can lease it for 2-4 years. And LA and San Francisco County are coming up with, well, LA definitely, they're going to start piloting the thing next year. San Francisco County is going to need several years yet they're just getting, they're not even really started, they're doing the planning of the planning. But they're very good people behind it, and we may get open source systems from San Francisco in addition to LA. But the counties cannot buy in for 10 years on Diebold systems. They should be leasing, and then after 2-4 years up, see what's available, and then get the better equipment. Because open source is not perfect. It can't be very hackable, but it's better than having, go look up Jeffrey Dean.
Yeah.
Please. He was a programmer for Diebold. This is what got me into this in February 2005. He was a programmer for Diebold, 23 convictions for embezzlement. And they knew about it when they hired him. Now just ask yourself, why is a voting system company hiring somebody to program election systems with 23 convictions? I've got the conviction papers. 23 convictions for embezzlement. That's all I needed to hear. I'm a geek, and I said, oh my God. It's just that right there. So what I said is, we got to be able to look at the code the guy's writing. That's open source, and that's our best defense against the Jeffrey Deans. So next year, if the bill passes, and there's a $450 million in free money for the counties, you're going to want to go to your county by county supervisors and say, lease it, don't buy it. But we'll bring that up next year. But there's going to be a lot more work for counties in the next couple of years than they're used to. There's going to be a lot more decisions that the supervisors are going to have to make. Do they opt in to the vote by mail, all vote by mail ballots and vote center systems? Orange County said no. They don't like vote by mail. They're Republicans. So they turned down the offer. It's the first county that's voted on it. But it's going to be county by county, and so each democracy advocates are going to have to get active in their counties and go to the supervisors and put pressure on them to do the right things, both with the vote centers, and then if they're buying machines, to lease them. So.
I'll let you read that one, and then I can probably answer part of it. We all may too. And while you're reading that, I just want to give a shout out to Lori Chamberlain of Chicago, a remarkable activist. She's the one who caught them in Illinois rigging their hand count, which is pretty typical to be done. I've caught that 2 or 3 times in my state. In Phoenix, Maricopa,
right?
pardon me?
The Bernie Sanders election?
Yeah, yeah. No, there's incredible evidence coming in from all of you. You're not reading in the media of what the heck is going on, but you want to read the question?
Can we create a broad, comprehensive election reform that is unified, organizing the public to work together through state ballot initiatives, constitutional amendment, all of these various things, she names various, the Brakey method, etc. Can we combine and come up with verifiable methods?
I think so, but it's going to take money. It's going to take dedicated people that are out there already who are working really hard, and to take them from semi-pro to pro, that is what we're going to try to do. You know, it's not going to be cheap, but I guarantee it's going to be inexpensive, because if we don't, we got a real disaster. And that is parts that we're trying to create by using that method, using this new method. And, you know, my dream is really to have 3 activists per state. And one has to be like a Jim. They got to watch these goddamn legislators like a hawk. You know, you win in court, they're going to sneak right around, and they're going to try to pass some kind of a bill to stop. Okay? That's called bushwhacking. Some people call it politics. I call it bushwhacking, because if I was a representative and I knew nothing about the lawsuit in Tucson and somebody brought me that bill, I said, yeah, it makes sense. Ballot images should be treated like ballots. Yeah. Well, they didn't, you know, realize it was a suit going on and it was a manipulation. I was another case that they went ahead and they were illegally storing the ballots. So what did they do? They passed a law to make it legal before the court case happened. Those are the things we're going to do. I guess you want to say something, Jim? No? Anybody else? I'm done. Want to bring that in?
Yeah, we're just about to end. So for those online or this is your, you know, here in front of us, this is your last moment to get things done. I did find the information of the, oh yeah, certainly. Is this you, Jim? Yeah. For people in California, do you want to talk about it?
This is nationwide. This is a national conference.
And you mean through being through it's national by being live cast or something?
It will be
with
live
questions
cast,
for
but
people?
the Voting Rights Task Force and the California Election Integrity Coalition, and I think some other allies, will be holding a national conference in Berkeley, October 7 and 8 at the South Berkeley Senior Center. And we are having John and I think Bob and Virginia Martin, Bev Harris, Lulu Freestott, a whole bunch of people
Lulu
coming.
DeFrace.
Huh? Lulu?
Remarkable journalist.
A whole bunch of people coming together in the same place the same weekend. And that will be October 7th and 8th. You can go to nvrtf.org. nvrtf.org to get the registration information. And we're going to have a great conference. And I hope everybody can make it, that can be there that weekend.
And I also want to mention the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology that put together the Graham Klobuchar bill that's going in front of Congress. It's they actually have a phone number, which is 202-600-7250, extension 101. And their email address is, their website is ICI-Tech, TECH, ICI-Tech, TECH.org. and their email is icitech.org/contact us/. So if you want to have an influence on this bill coming up, this is the contact information.
And Lori,
Yeah.
I love you and I thank you. You know, you're great for bringing us all together.
Okay,
And
good.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Great, wonderful. So thank you, and thank you all of you who have stayed this long, and we really appreciate your deep interest in having a democracy we can trust. So thank you to all of you.
Yeah, well done.